Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today, we are joined again by Rochelle Ivri. I'm really happy to have her on for a second time. She's one of nine citizenship judges in Canada, a professor at Mohawk College, adjunct faculty at Queen's Law's graduate diploma program in immigration and citizenship law. And I was just checking out the book I was using for my tribunal practice, and she's one of the co-authors there as well, amongst a number of other accomplishments. Certainly, I'm doing you no justice there. The winner of the Lincoln Alexander Award last year from the Law Society, and a whole lot more there. So I'm really excited again to have you, Rochelle, and perhaps you can fill in and tell us a bit about your journey there in terms of getting to where you are, and your interest in law and all of that. And thanks again for joining us.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm happy to join you again, JP. I started off much like many people with a strong interest in law when I was younger. My undergrad is in criminology from the University of Windsor with a minor in forensic anthropology. And so forensics, law, that intersection was always very interesting for me. I did things a little backward than some people. I actually delved into a career with the Federal Public Service for a number of years, working at the federal courts. I was a refugee hearings officer with the Immigration and Refugee Board on the Middle East team for a number of years. And then my family and I moved out of the Toronto area, we moved to the Niagara region. And, at that time, it was right at the cusp of regulation. And so some of the work that I had been doing in terms of working with law firms and taking on clients and what have you needed a license at that time. And so then I went to Trias College it was actually the only program for paralegals, like from Niagara all the way through to Hamilton. And so I went and got my diploma from Trios and opened my own practice and did that for a number of years and transitioned into teaching. And so in addition to that, I also when I had my fourth child, went and got my certification to become an immigration consultant as well. So I'm dually licensed as a paralegal and also as an RCIC, and had quite a robust practice, and then went into teaching, first part-time and then full-time at Mohawk, I would say in and around 2015, 2016. My areas, I guess, of specialty are administrative law, tribunal practice and procedure. So I would teach administrative law, tribunal practice and procedure, landlord tenant, and of course I also have a postgrad in dispute resolution. So I also teach the ADR courses as well. And then very happily, I'm also now teaching in the citizenship and immigration diploma program at Queen's, which has been very enriching and rewarding to be a part of that as well. And of course, every day presiding over citizenship ceremonies. As I was sharing with you earlier, I swore in my 35,000th new Canadian on Monday since being appointed in June of 2018, and that was cause for celebration here in our house. And actually, by the end of February, I will have presided over my 1,000th ceremony. So it's very rewarding. I'm so blessed and thankful to be able to be a part of such a special day for so many. And yeah, it's been such a rewarding experience. I guess the culmination of all of the regulatory law, all of the administrative law experience that I have, decision-making experiences that I have through volunteer work and what have you. And then, I now use that every day as a judge. So it's really special. I'm thankful.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was really cool that you have this book there of that I'm at coming up to. I just finished 35,000. So maybe you could tell us a bit about how you became a citizenship judge and what that entails in terms of how the ceremonies are. I know, I don't know, actually, maybe they are going have some in person again, or they're still virtual. I know the last time we
No,
talked, they were virtual, but
yeah.
what goes into all of that? And certainly, I mean, I could imagine years later, I don't know if anyone has come back and said, "Hey, you were the judge that presided, and
Yes,
here's what I've
yes,
done since 2018." So
absolutely.
maybe you can share a little bit about that insight.
Sure. So, I always say to my students, and I'll say to those watching that, if you have an interest in any type of adjudicative role, any type of decision making role, start gaining that skill set in ways that you can. And so for me, I guess the very first component of that, even though I wasn't a decision maker, was working at the IRB. And I used to do expedited refugee hearings, but also help with refugee hearings in the Middle East team. I would be representing, I guess, the government, asking questions, making representations in terms of whether or not someone met the requirements of either being deemed a convention refugee or a person in need of protection. And then from there, I had applied for and received a public appointment on the provincial level. So I was appointed to the Council of the College of Midwives of Ontario, and through that received quite a lot of training on disciplinary hearings and investigations and complaints. And so I actually chaired investigations and complaints for a while and sat on their executive committee. I was there for 8 years, so it's quite a lengthy period of time, but I was able to hone the decision-making skills and training, and then ended up doing the same thing for I guess it's now the Canadian College of Immigration Consultants, but at the time it was the ICCRC, and I used to do adjudicative matters there too, discipline, appeal, review, sitting on their committee as well. So I found ways to be able to hone that skill and to really be able to get experience writing decisions and being able to utilize that skill set. And so one day I saw a posting on the Federal Public Appointments website seeking citizenship judges. And citizenship judges do not have to be lawyers, although some of them are, much like a justice of the peace. And the difference is that mine is a 3-year appointment each time, as opposed to a justice of the peace who is appointed and then they're there. And so, I saw the requirements, presiding over citizenship ceremonies. Of course, I'm a people person. I think a little bit gregarious, and I love to be able to speak with people and interact. I have quite an extensive background in immigration, but in addition to that, my parents are immigrants to this country. My in-laws are immigrants to this country. My husband and I both have very much benefited from the fact that our parents respectively made the decision to come to Canada. And, I have a firm belief that, my story kind of represents exactly what the Canadian dream is about. But in addition to that, we also preside over hearings, and we also do a lot of outreach in the community and a lot of speaking engagements as well. And so those are things that I was doing prior to being a judge, and I was able to kind of find this thing that I can do that really just kind of utilizes all of the skill sets that I've been able to glean over the years. So right now we are doing virtual ceremonies, and we've been doing virtual ceremonies since my last ceremony in person was March 13th of 2020. I'm currently in my living room. It doesn't look like it, but that's where I am. And this is where I preside over ceremonies. Every time we kind of think about doing an in-person pilot or something like that, then, we get a new variant or something happens. And so the safety of people and ourselves, but new citizens and those who will be attending ceremonies is paramount. And so we won't be returning to in-person ceremonies until we know that it's safe to do so. So I happily do them from home now.
Yeah, so I mean, you mentioned there about sort of the hearing. So what are kind of matters that you would have to preside over in terms of citizenship issues that may arise that you can share with my students?
Sure. So back in, I want to say it was 2016. I'm trying to remember the exact date, but the C6 legislation came into effect, which affected the decision-making capabilities of citizenship judges. So before, it was citizenship judges that would be doing anyone who failed language testing or knowledge testing, they would be having hearings. We don't do that anymore. The hearings that we have are strictly in relation to physical presence and whether or not someone has met the threshold of physical presence. Sometimes credibility. So but still credibility in relation to physical presence. There it can be a multitude of different situations. So sometimes it's that we have found criminality, and so we're now exploring whether the criminality, whether it's something that's been overcome, whether or not it's something that affects their ability to obtain citizenship. So those are the types of things that we are looking at, but it is in relation to physical presence, I would say, for the most part.
And then, of course, the ceremonies now, albeit they are virtual, maybe you can share a bit about, you're talking about your own story, right? It's kind of going full circle. I mean, at some point you would have had to go through something like that, and now you're the one presiding over it. And what is it like? I mean, in terms of whether it was the ones in person before 2020 or virtually, when someone goes through that process, and I'm sure it's like a big day for them that they're become officially Canadian. I mean, maybe they have, the little maple leaf or some red and white, I don't know, but what is that kind of the interaction you get with people after they've completed the ceremony?
Sure. So confession, I never went to a citizenship ceremony ever in my life until I was appointed. And I'm going to say that it was a travesty. The fact that I didn't know what that experience was, I'm like so sad. I'm so happy that I get to be a part of it now, because my very first citizenship ceremony that I went to upon being appointed to observe, I was literally in tears. I was just so proud and so happy. People were ecstatic and just so moved by the entire experience. And it is really a moving experience. I always have said that, once I experienced, I was like, everyone needs to experience a citizenship ceremony because it really just speaks to what it means to be a Canadian, what it means to new Canadians to finally be a part of the family, like officially part of the Canadian family. I have had people literally, when we were in person, so in person, it used to look like that, people would come, they'd all be sitting, and it could be anywhere from, I would say, about 60, depending on the office, 60 to up to 300 people could be in a room. And, what happens is, the judge starts by saying a speech, really welcoming them and explaining their rights and responsibilities. And then we take a moment to actually hand everyone their certificates individually. And at that moment, that's when the fire, that's when the tears and all the waterworks start, because literally people will explain in that moment, I finally feel like I belong somewhere. I finally have a home. I'm not stateless anymore. Or, this has been my lifelong dream. I get to meet people who are doing amazing things for Canada. And it's just amazing to hear the stories of people's journeys. People will say, I waited 14 years for this day to happen, or some people it's 40 something years. And it's really just special. And then, after everyone gets their certificate, I officially proclaim them Canadian citizens, and we wave our flags together and we sing, "O Canada." And then we take some time for pictures afterward. I stay and take a picture with every single person. So it's really special. People bring their family and friends. I don't know what that will look like when we return to in-person, given our new reality. I suspect it might look a little different. But we have tried our best to recreate that same experience online. So, instead of, they come on, everyone gets on a Zoom just like this. And we have a welcome home video where they kind of see all the landscapes of Canada, and it's, all these amazing views of what it means to be Canadian. And then I do my speech, and we go over the oath of citizenship together, and I confer citizenship. I say, you are all now officially Canadian, and people cheer and they're so jubilant and happy. Sometimes we have to press mute because people are crying and they're hugging family and kissing and the whole nine, and people have, this is nothing. People have like balloons and flags and all sorts of things behind them. And it is just such a jubilant time. While I'm doing my speech, I have to stare straight ahead because people are crying on Zoom. It's just really special. And then we all sing O Canada together online. I give some closing remarks. I remind them that, this journey for them, they are now officially part of the Canadian family, and everything that they have to offer is appreciated. And, we talk about the fact that, this journey for so many means so much, and that, never forget that you are your ancestors' wildest dreams. They just couldn't imagine that you would be here. I think about that every day, that, I know that I'm my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I mean, my grandparents, my own parents, when they immigrated to Canada, never thought that their daughter would become one of 9 citizenship judges. They were here clearly, to make a better life and to do wonderful things and contribute to Canada, but certainly didn't know where, I would land at this juncture in my life. And so, I encourage people to continue to dream and to aspire to anything that they can imagine. Knowing that they are now part of the Canadian family and that they are not alone. And so it is just a really special time. And I get a lot of thank yous in the chat, and people will unmute and say thank you. And it's just really beautiful. It's an amazing experience. And, the fact that I have been able to do that for how many thousands of people is just such a blessing.
Yeah, I mean, and I know, speaking of history and the future, and certainly with Black History Month and February and forever, I know you'd posted about Stanley Grizzle there and all the other Black citizenship judges. So how does that feel now? Again, now you're part of this history, right? I mean, it's not just February, it's forever, right? That kind of being involved. I mean, it must mean very special to you, especially this month, right? And celebrating all the 35,000 there that you've presided on.
Yeah.
What can you share maybe more from you and your personal sort of side there of everything that's happening, and what do you see kind of in the future there for I mean, not just the Black community, but other people of color, all the immigrants that that you're getting a chance to touch their lives, and you're talking about all of the the waterworks and the joy and jubilation that there must be a lot of emotions that you're always feeling there.
It's always emotional for me. Like, there's another judge, Judge Carrier, and the two of us are always almost on the verge of tears every ceremony, because I do not take it lightly that people have been through hell and back for me to be sitting here. And that I stand on the shoulders of, giants, like just amazing people with resilience and strength for me to be here. And the level of gratitude is it's undescribable. I posted about Stanley Grizzle because he was the very first Black citizenship judge, but he was just a force in terms of advancing not just the labor movement for Black people, but for all people of color. One thing that I always stress to my students when I teach human rights law is that the struggle for human rights, the struggle for recognition and to be treated with dignity, we have a lot of people of African descent to thank for that. Bromley Armstrong, Stanley Grizzle, like the amount of people the names are endless in terms of why we even have human rights legislation here in Canada. And it never escapes me that so many have been through so much in order for me to be sitting here and doing what I do each and every day, and that I have the audacity to be able to dream and to be able to think that I can be anything. I'm just so thankful. And I feel like my role, it took me a while to kind of realize that, that I am like living history. I don't think I ever, culturally for me, that's like, it's not humble. And, I come from humility is really important. And so I never ever thought about the fact that, I might be blazing trails for other people. But as I have been walking through my life, being the first paralegal to receive the Lincoln Alexander Award, or being the first Black woman to sit on the Council of the College of Midwives, or the first person of color to sit on the, Niagara on the Lake Public Library Board, to be the only Black citizenship judge, and what that means for other people of color when I come up on the screen. One time I did a speaking engagement, and they had told the MC, it was a young African Canadian student at Brock University, and they told him, so the judge is going to be coming to give her, her keynote address. And he was like, okay, that's fine, but we never met. And I'm standing there in traditional clothes, and he was introducing this judge and didn't realize that it was me. And it was actually really funny because he said, oh my goodness, you're the judge. And I said, yeah, it's me. And he said, I just expected this like white-haired white man, right? Like this idea of what we see sometimes and what we think of. And so if I can be part of the mentorship program that I helped to co-found, one of the things we talked about is this concept of they cannot be what they cannot see. And so it's so important for people to see people who look like them in so many different ways. We're intersectional beings. And so I have people at ceremonies who say, to see you as a woman up there means so much. I always talk about the fact that I'm a mom. And so to see a mother, because some people think that to be a judge and to be doing what I'm doing, I couldn't possibly have children. And no, I've got 4, aged 8 to 22. And so that's something where somebody might see themselves in me in that respect, maybe because of my hair, maybe because of, the fact that I was raised in public housing in Toronto, like I come from very humble beginnings. And I think that people can see themselves in me in so many different ways. And I think that that is powerful because it means that you know what can be for yourself. Like there really is, we know that there are barriers. We know that there are structural barriers. We know that there are systemic, true barriers to people being able to actualize their dreams. But I would hope that my presence might inspire someone, despite some of the obstacles, despite some of the things that they're facing, to just keep pressing on and to persevere and to, find a way to divert those obstacles to just continue reaching for their dreams. And I talk a lot about the fact that I feel like my responsibility is to, open that door and keep it open for other people to be able to come in right after me and beside me. Like, let's go, and for me, that's a really powerful thing to be able to do. And I don't take that responsibility lightly. And sometimes I am the first or the only in the room, and that could be the first or only woman. It could be the first and only person of color. It could be the first or only Black person or woman. I've been all of them in different instances. And my responsibility is to speak for those who are not sitting at that table, to be the voice for those who don't have the privilege or don't have the courage, for various reasons, legitimate reasons, to be able to say certain things and to ensure that we are that we're not forgetting people who should be sitting at the table and their circumstances. So I don't take my role or my responsibilities lightly.
Speaking of giants there, you mentioned the Lincoln Alexander and the award you won last year. And to that as well, I mean, for all the community service. And I think one of the things actually, guess I had last week says, before you can be a good licensee, a good lawyer, you got to be a good person. And then they also had a lot of community service. So if you can tell us about the importance of how that kind of connects, with, the entire, on all of the legal paths that you went on, from paralegal to immigration consultant to, the various roles as tribunal members and citizenship judge. I mean, how that kind of goes back to that, humility and that humanity, that aspect that sometimes gets lost in the practice or the pursuit of law.
Yeah. So I So I will admit that much of what I do, I was raised seeing my parents give back. I do believe that, we emulate what we see. So my kids are being raised with the understanding that to be a leader, you must be a servant. So, like, to be a servant leader, your job is to serve your community. Your job is to advance the causes of those who are voiceless in what you do. And that can look so many different ways because we all have different interests and different things that resonate with us. And so I always talk about the fact that we have a responsibility, especially as licensees who we have a certain acumen and a certain ability to be able to advocate, to use that skill set in positive ways to be able to speak for the voiceless. And some people, their thing is the environment. Some people, their thing is, or climate change. For other people, it can be human rights. For other people, it can be animals. For other people, like, there's so many different things that that resonate with us, that move us inside. And, while yes, we do have to build our careers, we can still connect the things that we're passionate about to be able to help us to advance our careers. I can't remember her name right now, and I feel so horrible, but the woman that had won the Distinguished Paralegal Award, perfect example of someone who, I think her first name was Kathleen, if I'm not mistaken. Perfect example of someone who is passionate about the environment and is utilizing her skill set to be able to advance causes that are meaningful for her, and has turned that into a career. And I think that if we think about the work that we do in the community, if we think about the fact that we have a responsibility to each other and to lift as we climb, then we can find ways to be able to use our community service, use the way that we interact with others, using even our practice to be able to do that advocacy work and do some of that, some of the work to improve our communities and make our communities thrive. I think we all have a responsibility to do so.
And I'm sure if it's going to bother you there, but it's Kathleen Cooper, I believe, is the winner there. So you get close marks there. Now, on that point there, in terms of what can students do as they're kind of getting into the profession? I mean, certainly you can think back to either of your times there, or even back to Windsor there. But in terms of getting through your studies and having that outlook of giving back into your community, what are some of the things that in terms of getting connected and networking within the legal community, that you can be doing those things as well as try to find that balance, right? Because I mean, certainly it's not like you have all the time in the world to do all of these community service. I mean, I don't know how you make it work, but what can they do in terms of kind of making those connections and sort of building that while they're also building themselves up, as you say, build and lift in their careers?
Yeah. So I would advise students to think of things that really resonate with them, because if you're doing something that speaks to you in meaningful ways, and if you feel that work is valuable, then it doesn't necessarily feel as much like work, right? And I've been there. I've been in the midst of, significant studies and, feeling overwhelmed. There's nothing wrong with also just kind of in exam time and during times when it's really stressful to say, okay, I can't commit to this right now. But certainly at times when you kind of look at your overarching schedule and what your life looks like, you can think about endeavors to volunteer your time. So sometimes, like for instance, I just saw in Hamilton, the Women of Distinction Awards is looking for volunteers. That's an amazing way to be able to network, to be able to get to know amazing women in the Hamilton, I think it's Hamilton Halton area, who are doing amazing things, and to be able to make some connections. And you're probably volunteering your time for like 2 days or something, the day of the event and probably the day after or something like that, to be able to help with that type of event. but you can also be joining, like, utilizing the fact that you're a young person to your advantage. Many different organizations are looking for youth representation to sit on boards or to head up committees or do that. My own kids, I can only give an example from my own family. My own kids down the street, we have a Lions Club that's not too far from us, and they are Leos. They're junior Lions, and they give their time when they can. So, in the summertime, they're always at the fish fries helping us to raise money. But then they also help with organizing glasses to be able to be donated to, various organizations for those who can't afford glasses. And they do all sorts of volunteer work. And now they've been doing that for a few years. And now my two, one's in grade 9 and one's in grade 10, have decided that they are going to be on the executive. So my daughter is the chair or the president. I don't know what they call themselves. And then my son is the secretary. And those are ways for you to be able to just get a little bit more involved than just, the one-offs. There's a youth advisory council. Many cities and municipalities have youth advisory councils where they're looking for people, within certain age groups to be on the council to kind of speak to the issues about, regarding young people. And I will say youth is like 30 and under, just so you don't think I'm only speaking to, 15-year-olds. And they're looking for that type of representation. But there are so many ways, if you kind of just seek out community organizations that are doing work that you think is meaningful. The YWCA of Niagara does amazing work. The YWCA in Hamilton does amazing work. And they're always looking for people to be able to be able to give of their time. And you might find something that really is meaningful for you. It might even be the thing that becomes your advocacy work. Maybe if you start working with the homeless and you start understanding their issues, you may now start in your studies now, you're now looking for things that, would be able to advance the needs of that population. There are so many issues regarding homelessness. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed so many inequities. And, we can utilize our skill sets to be able to then hone our skill and also give back. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that's not related. Maybe there's an area of law as you're kind of going through your program that resonates with you. So you've decided to volunteer with a tenant rights association because landlord-tenant was really, really, important to you, or you realize, like I know when I teach landlord-tenant, I have my students bring in their leases. I shouldn't say it's hilarious, but I have them bring in their leases, and then we go through all the clauses and they realize that, oh my goodness, like half these things shouldn't even be in here, right? And so how many other people do you know who are in that situation? That might be something that you now will connect yourself with a tenant rights association to be able to speak to some of those issues or to be able to assist with some of those issues. So there's so many things that we could be doing to be able to network, to be able to connect with those who we want to be connected with, who we want to learn from, who we want to advocate together with. You just have to really think outside of the box and think outside of just, here are my studies. How can I connect what I'm interested in to something that can also help to advance the community?
Since you did bring up tribunal practice there, and I know I saw your name there on the cover of the book, and I realized, oh, what else does she do? Maybe you could tell us a bit about. I know you have different students now at the Mohawk and Queens over the years, and what can you share in terms of tribunal practice that's different than going through provincial offenses or small claims court and the Ontario Court of Justice for criminal matters? I mean, I know it's obviously a very broad question, and there's so many different chapters in that book as well, and you've taught many different areas. But when you're looking at administrative law and tribunal practice, I mean, what can you share with students who are either taking that class or going to take that class about understanding how our tribunal system works?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because my experience is that when students kind of come to me in tribunal practice and procedure, it was never really something they thought they were like, this doesn't resonate with me. I didn't know that I'd be interested. And then all of a sudden, as we start talking about the various tribunals and some of the scenarios that can happen that, you know, we can utilize our skill sets to assist with, then all of a sudden the world opens up, right? Because it's through tribunals that currently, in the current iteration, that we can do immigration work, right? You could be passionate about refugee law all of a sudden, and then, you know, under the paralegal scope, you can be assisting people at the Immigration and Refugee Board, you know, and really getting into the issues surrounding refugee law and detention. You could decide that there's many paralegals that I know that they specialize in landlord-tenant law, and that's all that they do. Other people, human rights law, labor law. There's just so many areas that affect our everyday lives. Like, this is the thing. Many of the things related to tribunals are the things that affect our everyday lives. Not everyone's going to end up in, you know, in provincial offenses court. Some will, but you could possibly end up being wronged and need to file a human rights complaint, or have an issue with your landlord and need that type of advocacy, or you know, you're on social assistance and you need someone to help you advocate, whether it's EI, whether it's CPP, or whether it is OAS, or, you know, any of those social benefits. I will tell you, my very first, before I even became a paralegal, my very first interaction was in relation to my own mother having an issue relating to CPP disability benefits. And we had been in a very serious car accident right before my 18th birthday, and life as we knew it changed all of a sudden. My mom had been a nurse, and all of a sudden she couldn't work. And, you know, we went through a really challenging time, both financially, emotionally, physically. And I watched her kind of go through this process of advocating for herself in order to receive CPP disability benefits. And I'm trying to remember the provincial, it's not coming to me right now, but all of her various disability benefits. And what happened was she was actually denied. So that's where I came in. And all of a sudden, this is, of course, pre-licensing. I didn't even think about being a paralegal at this point, but I remember reviewing the act, reviewing the requirements that she was supposed to meet, and advocating on her behalf, because she had a brain injury and she had some physical ailments, so she couldn't really do some of that. And you know, writing that reconsideration letter and saying, no, here's what your act says. Here's the totality of her injuries. Here's the evidence to support that. And I'm asking for reconsideration. And she was successful. And, you know, so that kind of had a ripple effect federally, provincially. And while, you know, the funds aren't like, you know, you're certainly not winning the lottery, it certainly was better than nothing. And so that was my very first experience of dealing with tribunals. And that happens every single day to, I can't tell you how many people in our province. So the things that we do in a tribunal context, you know, are really everyday issues. You know, somebody who gets a MPAC assessment for their house and they're like, my house isn't worth this much. You know, that's an intersection with tribunal practice and procedure, and going and advocating in order to have their property tax reviewed and the value of their home lowered. Like, these are all things. The other thing that I started with a newfound interest is bylaws, right? Because in many cases, our bylaws are the things that really affect our everyday, how tall your grass can be, how loud you can be, and for how long. It's really, you know, really dealing with our everyday lives. And I met someone who does, that's basically his area of law. And, you know, that's huge. That there's a lot there. And people underestimate that, because I think sometimes our programs don't necessarily speak to the multitude of ways that you can, you know, be advocating for people in a tribunal context. And so happy to have contributed to the text, because I think it's really important.
I mean, certainly to draw one common thread of all of the different tribunals, or even your own experience there before being licensed, is in terms of advocacy, right? And people don't realize, I mean, that there's so many different tribunals. I think someone told me that there's like 500 to 1,000 tribunals across the country that are
You're right.
within paralegal scope. So when they're like, "Oh, we can
Yep.
only do these things," I'm like, "Yeah, well, there's
Lot.
literally hundreds of tribunals you can appear before. So find a few that are you're passionate about, whether it's
Exactly.
animal control review board, right, or maybe it's about landlord tenant or human rights, as you mentioned. So now, in looking at all of this, I mean, one of the common themes, I mean, one is certainly preparation. You got to come into tribunals prepared, but another is in terms of delivering, written or oral submissions and questioning witnesses, and depending again on the tribunal. And certainly, you've had the experience on the other side, on the ICCRC's discipline panel, and
Mhm.
the nurses there as well. and
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what can you share from those experiences now, in terms of, I mean, being as well, obviously when you were a licensee, you've appeared and advocated for your clients, that you can share with students in terms of, I mean, that happens to be one of the skills that's the hardest to kind of master, right, is to get up there and make your submissions, ask the questions.
That's
What
right.
can you share about advocacy in especially in the tribunal context?
So the one thing that I will say first is that you can't dabble. So you really, these are areas of law that are very robust. And so you actually, I would say to pursue things that you have an interest in, because this will be like your new best friend. These are all the things you're reading about all the time. These are the things that you're immersing yourself in so that you can speak to them from a place of knowing as opposed to a place of guessing. And so if your interest is in landlord tenant law, like you're going to be reading up on the latest case law, really staying abreast on what's happening in the scope, having a fulsome understanding of the applicability of certain aspects of the legislation, and immersing yourself in those areas, animal control, whatever it is that you have an interest in. It can't be on a cursory basis. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing is that your skill set to be able to ask questions, to be able to ascertain information, to glean information is fundamental in a tribunal context, because it's not like, you could meet someone who does criminal law, for instance, and they've never necessarily been to a trial, right? Or, like you could meet people who have never been to a trial, because there's a lot of negotiations and plea deals and things like that behind the scenes. Civil, for instance, civil law is very much like that. Personal injury can be like that as well. So, you really need to hone the skill of asking questions and being curious, and to be able to drill down the right questions, and to be able to glean the right information from individuals. And really, it's just a matter of practice. The more you do it, the more you get better at it. I'm never going to forget my very first actual hearing at the IRB. And it was when they first started with the refugee protection officer asking questions first. And so I was nervous because, you can do things in a simulated environment, much like mock hearings or anything else. But then the real deal happens. And preparation is the most important thing. I was prepared. I knew that file inside and out. I prepared my questions, and I went to town. Like I just kind of started asking away. And I remember there was a lawyer on the other side of me. And they said at that time, people had the choice to either go first, they could ask their clients, or I could ask their clients. And he said, "Oh, is it her first time? She can do it." And I was like, "Okay, I'll show you." And so I was prepared. And by the time I was finished with this client, he said under his breath, "Well, that was a mistake." Right? So the reality is that if you prepare right now as a judge, when I am preparing for a hearing, I have a template and I have the file, and I am writing down all of my questions just the same way as you would for your own advocacy. I'm writing down all the things I need to know. What are the things that will hinge on my decision? Like, what are the things I need to know in order for me to make a decision? What are the things that don't make sense? Where are the areas that there's discrepancy or there's contradiction? I need to get evidence on certain things from these individuals. And I write all of my questions out with space, because you need space to write in answers, and you need space to write in other questions that might come up. but this is a skill set that you hone. And I still use that skill set just on the other side of things, right? And as a judge, the way that it is at the Citizenship Commission is that I ask the questions, right? And so I'm asking questions in order for me to be able to, one, explain to the client that's sitting in front of me what the issues are, but also what I need to know in order to make a decision. And I write copious notes. They all become part of the record. And then I utilize those answers and what I see on the record to be able to come up with a decision in relation to someone's ability to obtain citizenship. And so, I've written 14-page and 20-page decisions, and I've also written 4-page and 8-page decisions, but it's the same skill set, no matter what. You need to prepare. You always need to prepare. This is not something you can wing. This is something that you're going to have to really take it very seriously in order to be able to do well. The other thing is, you really should be, as best as you can, observing on a tribunal. For tribunals, it's very challenging, and I understand that because many of them are kind of behind closed doors. They don't really let people in. One thing that has been interesting is that you can get access, for instance, to the landlord tenant board. You can get access to a room now, and you can kind of watch online from the comfort of your home. And so that has been happening more and more. And I suspect that as we come out of a COVID environment, that will continue. So that can be challenging, but there are ways to still kind of to gain those skills. And that's why volunteering was so important for me, because by being on the Discipline Appeal and Review Committee, by being on the discipline panels for the Council of the College of Midwives, I was able to continually hone that skill and learn and get more training for free in order to be able to really gain that skill set. But when it's all said and done, for you to be able to effectively advocate for someone in front of a tribunal, you need to know the legislation very well. You need to really get familiar with the case law. I, by nature, am a case law junkie, and I think it's boded me well because I've been able to speak to cases and I'm just naturally curious about the cases that are happening so that I get a better understanding of the way that adjudicators look at the information. That's really what you need to be understanding. How is an adjudicator going to be receiving the information that you're giving? Half the time, the most frustrating thing is receiving information that has no bearing on the case. And when I used to work at the federal courts, some of the best lawyers were the most succinct because they knew the issues. They knew what the judges needed to hear. And they said, okay, here are the issues and here are my representations as far as those issues. Here's the case law you need to take a look at. And here's what the case law says. Boom, done. We don't need to be here for 2 hours, right? And when you have that level of understanding, not only do you get the respect of the judiciary, but you really, by kind of gaining those skill sets, you really are doing a service to your client because you have an understanding and you are truly kind of living that the values of that tribunal. So that's hopefully gives a good answer.
No, there's a lot of great nuggets of knowledge in there. And certainly throughout this hour here, you've shared so much with us, so much of your own story and the role that you play. And certainly for my trial students, I mean, the fact that we had a role there at some point in your career and certainly very appreciative of you. I mean, again, we were talking about the different in terms of intersectionality, right? I mean, it's always helps students from this school, right? That they can say, hey, that's someone that went to the school. They were in my shoes, right? It makes it more real to them, just the same way as for people of color, for women, as you meant, when it puts a face there, right? You see that that's something that I can achieve, and congratulations there on all of your success and continuing as say living history there for those to come and forever, right? In February and forever being the theme there for Black History Month, especially.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you have any final words of wisdom for all the students and everyone here listening. And thanks again for joining us again this year. And then certainly I'll reach out to you in 2023 and say, let's get what else have you accomplished in the next year here? But
Yeah.
always a pleasure, always a joy there. Thank you so much. And any final words to wrap up?
Yeah, the one thing, so thank you for having me. I always appreciate being on with you, and any chance that I have to be able to impart the things that I've learned along the way. I welcome those opportunities to be able to do so. The one thing that I will say is, we really have a responsibility to one, advocate for those who do not have a voice. And that can look, like I said earlier, in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be the way that I do it, but you have the capacity to be able to speak for those who aren't in rooms, to be able to advocate for those who aren't in the room with you. You might be the only person that has the capacity to be able to say it, and try to utilize your own courage and tenacity to be able to do that. I've been exactly where you are as a student. And in fact, when I was a trial student, I had 3 babies. I had 3 kids, and was on the council of the College of Midwives at the time, and was trying to manage. And it can be a lot. And give yourselves grace. We're dealing with a global pandemic. We're still in the midst of it, and every time we think we're crawling out of it, in we go again. So give yourself grace. I have made many mistakes along the way. And I think if I beat myself up for the mistakes that I've made, I wouldn't be sitting here, with you today. The reality is that we will make mistakes. It's how we recover from those mistakes. It's how we rise above those mistakes, how we atone for the mistakes that we have made, and how we move forward in a positive way in order to make transformational positive change within our respective communities. My hope for all of you is that when you are walking through this world, that one, you can be proud of yourselves, but that you are an inspiration to others, even if you don't know it. Always, as they say in Jamaica, walk good, treat people with respect. It doesn't matter who they are, because you never know who they might become, or you never know what you might need from them. The smallest amongst us sometimes are the most powerful and the most useful and the most helpful. And so that's what I will leave you with. I wish you all the very best. And thanks again, JP, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Take care and all the best, Rochelle.
Take care.